Welcome to the session. My name's Andy Humphries. I work in the funding data unit within the ESFA's funding directorate, and I'm going to talk to you today about the process for the high needs place review data collection. The place change process for the 24-25 academic year, it launches, we're expecting next week. So we've got early October, we're expecting early next week, and it allows local authorities to submit adjustments to the current number of high needs places at institutions that are already funded by ESFA, or where there will be new high needs place provision for an institution that can be funded by the ESFA. So placement numbers that you submit should be agreed commissioning activity and reflect strategic planning. You must consult with your institutions in scope of the process. And the funded place numbers that you enter into the submission, into your request to change places, must include any places agreed and commissioned by other local authorities. I will cover that in a little bit more detail, but the full high needs process means that you should account for those places being commissioned by other LAs, but you will then get compensated for that via the import-export adjustment later on in the academic year. This process also requests information around hospital education, and we've produced guidance on gov.uk on how that all works, and there are links to that guidance in these slides, so you'll be able to access it that way once you get the PDF of this. Submissions should be submitted by the 10th of November, so you need to get those in by the 10th of November. There's a list of the in-scope institutions for the 24-25 place change process. Note that special post-16 institutions that meet the initial eligibility criteria to receive funding from ESFA and are not currently funded by ESFA in the current 23-24 academic year, they are also in scope. Those funded directly by the local authority, such as maintained schools and pupil referral units, local authorities manage those changes, and you don't need to tell the ESFA for those. You can use this process for a maintained school that's likely to convert by the 1st of January. And you can use the new and existing area of the form, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. But there is also a form which I'll also cover, which we'd like you to complete just as a belt and braces, really, for those schools that during the process convert to being an academy, or it is well established and confirmed that they will either convert in December or convert in January. Okay, but otherwise it is that list of providers there: mainstream academies and free schools, the studios and UTCs, etc. Okay, where a local authority and the provider have not agreed a change, then you should indicate that in the return. Where those cases are not agreed, so where you've requested a change in places and the provider has not agreed that at the point of return, then we will determine the funded place numbers using the process that we've set out in the technical note. That will involve using either the school census or the ILR, depending on the provider type, and we'll look at the kind of the direction that you are requesting the high needs places move compared to the direction of the number of pupils in those providers according to the census and ILR. That said, last year we had more than 95% of the requests to change places being agreed at the point of submission in November. So most cases, the vast majority, are agreed between yourselves and the provider before the submission. Once we've worked through those requests, we will publish the outcomes in late January next year, and that will then kick off a 2-week inquiry window where local authorities and providers may advise the ESFA if place numbers have since been agreed. So it may be that at the point of submission you hadn't got the final agreement on those new places, and in the intervening period up to the end of January that agreement has then come through. So when we've then published the outcomes from the original submission, if that agreement has since been reached, then let us know. During the inquiry window, ESFA may also consider exceptional cases where the numbers are still not agreed, but it would represent a significant change in the number of places to be funded. And the inquiry window will not consider new requests. So if we receive information of a provider requiring a change at that point, we will not consider those. It is only about those listed in the outcomes where a change has been requested and we're providing an outcome towards that request. A recent addition to the process has been a deed of variation, and this is required where local authorities are working with academies to fund high needs places, but the academy's funding agreement with ESFA does need to list the provision for high needs, and it also needs to coincide with the age range of the academy. Now, it may be that you have an 11 to 16 provider that is now going to support post-16 high needs places. That would need a change in its age range for us to be able to fund post-16 high needs. Okay, it may be that the provider is a mainstream academy, but is now going to expand its provision to include a high needs unit. Again, that would need a deed of variation to its funding agreement to allow that provider to receive funding from ESFA for those high needs places. It does not mean that they cannot receive funding for that provision, but they would not be able to receive it from the ESFA. Okay, it is for the Academy Trust to attend to the DOV, but the local authority, you do need to indicate the position regarding the deed of variation in the return. And I'll talk through the options in that return shortly regarding the deed of variation. If a deed of variation is being worked on or it isn't in place, that will not in itself mean the request will be turned down. The inquiry window may show that the request is initially rejected and the initial allocation to the academy may not reflect that request. But if we receive the deed of variation by the 26th of April next year, then we can account for it, amend the allocation and adjust the changes to your deductions to your dedicated schools grant during the year. If the deed of variation is not received by ESFA by that point, then the change will remain not agreed and the LA should continue to fund any provision directly. Okay, so if you know about the DOV by the time you submit the template, great, let us know on the template by choosing the right option. If it's still pending, then we may not reflect it initially, but if we get it by the 26th of April, then we can change the allocation, because we recognise that sometimes the documentation with regards to a DOV can take some time to get finalised. So we have got that added opportunity to get it through to us so that by the time the allocations start next September, they will get reflected. But if they're received after that date, then the allocations will stay as is, but you can fund them directly. The high needs place change data collection process will open via Galaxy Key. So we'll be using the same approach as for the recent import-export process over the summer. We will issue the notifications week beginning the 9th of October. If you haven't received a notification in the local authority by close of play on the 10th, then please do contact the high needs mailbox. Okay, and we'll make sure we can either let you know who it has been sent to, or we'll follow up to check that it's the delivery is working okay. Okay, they're direct emails, so you can then open that email. It will take you through to Galaxy, and you can then view and download the dataset. The outcomes following the submissions and the QA of those datasets, and the 2-week inquiry window, that will start in late January. And there you go, there's the link to the full funding arrangements for high needs for the 24-25 academic year. So as I say, the form will be provided via a Galaxy email, as we've done for the import-export process this past summer. Please make sure you download the template quite quickly. The way Galaxy operates is that any attachments in an email to Galaxy, or through Galaxy, I should say, the attachments will expire within 1 month. Now, the process is only slightly longer than 1 month, but don't wait until you're about to submit the file and think, all right, I'll now go and download it. Please download it a bit earlier so that you've got it and on your network, on your systems, and then you can work with it, complete it, and send it back. The email will remain there, but the attachments do expire within 1 month. So when you need to submit, you open Galaxy via the initial email and clicking on the link, and then you will be taken to your Galaxy area, and you can then reply and attach the form. The form itself has got 6 areas. The first, and I'll go through each of these in order, but there are the area for the contact details and sign off. LAs with hospital education, there are 2 areas to sign off, and I will cover those quickly, but there is the main place change process sign off and a hospital education sign off as well, but that will only apply to the LAs who will complete a hospital education area of the submission. The second area, we provide a list of high needs places at the providers in scope for the current academic year, 2023-2024. That isn't data you can change. That is simply a reminder of the data that is currently being used to inform funding for the providers in scope in your local authority, and that is there for information. It is not the area that you can change data on. The areas that you can change data on are on the next sheet, and that has 2 areas. One for those who are new to ESFA high needs funding for the 2024-2025 academic year, and that is classed as for new and existing providers. Okay, so they exist as an ESFA funded provider but not had high needs funding in the 2023-24 academic year, or they are a brand new provider to ESFA and high needs funding. That's the first section. The second section is for providers currently funded by the ESFA for high needs places, and that will be pre-populated with all the providers in scope and their current high needs places, which you can then change. Okay, so you don't need to provide all of the information about every provider that currently receives funding and you want to make changes to. You simply have to complete the first few columns around the DOV and whether it was agreed or not, and then the number of places that you want to fund in 24-25 if you're changing it. Okay, and again, I'll go through that in a little more detail shortly. The penultimate area is around hospital provision. Again, doesn't apply to most LAs, but for some LAs that have hospital provision, they can complete that. And the final sheet is the validation sheet, and that, very much like the APT, for those of you who operate that as well in your local authority, helps yourselves and the ESFA to identify where there may be issues in terms of your submission, but before you submit it. So if you can have a look at the validation sheet before you submit and attend to any red flags that are appearing on that sheet before you submit it. That way, it then reduces the risk of us having to send it back to you because there's a few, if you like, common sense or contradictory evidence or incomplete returns in the file that you've sent us. Okay, so those are the 6 sheets, and I'll just talk through each of those areas now. Okay, so don't worry that you can't read that cover sheet in great detail. It is just a a screenshot of the front page. So that top box there, that has the opportunity for you to list the people who have submitted and completed this this template. And then the box on the left hand side, you have the I agree, which confirms that you are effectively signing off this this return, and the name of the primary contact on that bottom left hand box. The DCS sign off on the right hand side is for hospital education. So that is that additional sign off that is required for hospital ed, and as I've mentioned, not relevant for the majority of LAs, but where you are making a submission on hospital ed, then we do need DCS sign off as well. Okay, the second tab is, as I mentioned, the data that is already informing allocations for 2023-24 academic year, both in terms of the allocations to providers and, where appropriate, any deductions from your dedicated schools grant. It is only those providers who are in scope for this process. It will include the schools that became an academy in October. Okay, so we have got those included. And it is purely for information to support the process. You can't make changes to data on this tab of the template. Okay, and if you manage to, we won't spot them. Okay, we won't pick them up from there. It won't be the sheet that we'll use. Okay, so we have fully expected to put protection on that sheet, but if somehow that isn't the case, changing data there will not be recognised as submission for the place change process. The place to change high needs places is on the place change notification, or PCN sheet. Okay, and as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, this is where there are two areas to the tab, depending on whether the provider is already in receipt of high needs place funding. The first area is for new and existing providers. So they are those that don't currently get funding for high needs places from ESFA at all. They may have had it in the past, but aren't receiving it in 23-24. They will be existing providers or new providers who are brand new. They're not getting any funding from ESFA at all in 23-24. You need to list either of those in that top section. Okay. The second section, there is additional functionality in this, the current section this year, and we've put this in to reduce the amount of data entry that local authorities are required to do. So all providers in scope will be listed in that current section of the PCN worksheet. Okay, they'll be pre-populated in alphabetical order by the provider's name, and it means that you will need to fill in some of the background information regarding the change. So was it agreed? When do you want it to start from? And the situation around the deed of variation. And then simply in addition, the number of places required for the 24-25 academic year. We won't need school name and the provider IDs. That is all already there. Okay, so we've hopefully reduced, from your point of view, you'll see it as a reduction in the amount of work that we need you to do in terms of completing that form, because all providers in scope in your LA will be listed in that second section. Okay, there is the opportunity to complete a notes section, and we would encourage you to do that for all of the new and existing entries. And if you can provide a bit of detail in the current as well, then that is all very helpful, but it is required for the new and existing. So there will be a validation flag error if in new and existing there aren't any notes completed in that column. Okay, so for new and existing, as I've explained how to define a new provider and existing provider, wherever possible, please provide the identifiers for that provider on, you can get those from Get Information About Schools. So we're talking about the UKPRN, the LAS tab. We know that some providers in scope may not have an LAS tab on GIAS. You know, we acknowledge that, but wherever you can, please do add that provider information into the area of the sheet. Particularly brand new provision, there may be, they maybe haven't opened yet, okay, and so the IDs may not be available. We understand that, but wherever possible, please do put an accurate UKPRN or other provider identifier in, and you can get that from Getting Information About Schools in nearly all cases. Please complete all the cells available, but note that the values you put into the provider type field will influence what other cells can be populated. So the tab will change some cell colors to indicate where we would expect you to be able to put data into. Okay. So steer clear of the grey cells. If you want to put a place number into an area that's greyed out, then it means you've got the provider type wrong. Okay, so one informs the other, so do have a look at that. Okay. Do not list a provider that is shown on the 23-24 high needs data tab. Okay, that will create an error in the validation sheet, because if they're being funded for high needs places already, then you need to list them on the current section, which is just the lower section on the tab. Okay, so that would create a validation flag, and therefore you need to remove them from the new and existing element and put them into the current section of the tab instead. Okay, so make sure that you are only putting the new providers that meet the new and existing criteria in the top section, and then any that are listed on the previous tab, they go into the current area. Okay, so for current, they are the providers that are already receiving high needs funding from ESFA this academic year. Please complete each column for those providers you want to make a change to their funded places for, in order from left to right. Okay, so it will start with has the change been agreed, and work through to include the situation with the deed of variation if it's needed or not, around the date that the change needs to start from, etc. So work through it in order. The provider type again will influence what cells you can enter data into. And we only need you to enter the number of places to be requested. The difference column will be populated if you put a number into the 24-25 column as appropriate. Okay. If any providers do not need a change in their funded place numbers, then you can leave the row entirely as it is. If you put a 0 in, he's thinking I'm saying no change. If you put 0 in, that will be taken as a removal of all existing high need places. Okay, so if you don't want to make a change for a provider, just leave it all blank. Okay, don't change anything, don't delete anything, just leave it, and we will take that as no change. Okay, so a 0 is taken as a value, and it means that you're essentially closing that high needs provision. Okay, or that area of high needs funding provision anyway, and we won't fund any places. Okay, so naught is an answer, as blank will be taken as leave it as it is. So when you've completed those that tab with the changes for this year, either you're adding places that are new and existing provider, or you're changing current funding levels, then have a look at the validation sheet. It can be used to check that there are no errors in the data that you are intending to provide to us. And that will include that you have listed providers in the right area. So as I say, you haven't put providers who are currently receiving funding in the new or existing area. Okay, so it does check for that and it will flag it. It can't resolve it for you. You will need to go in and make that change, but it does show where that has happened. It will check that for any new and existing entries, that there is some text provided in the notes column, just to give us a bit more information about that new provision, or the change to an existing provider now getting a high need or intending to get high needs provision, having not had it in 23-24. It does flag up if there's any entries entered into a place type that is not appropriate for that provider type. So again, do make sure that you're only entering data into the white cells that are available. And it does also highlight if there's a duplication of a provider across the two areas. So if you list a provider in two areas, it will flag that up. It will also flag up if you've made a change, but you haven't completed the first column that says I'm requesting a change. So it's kind of a validation that each row has been completed fully. Okay, and there aren't any contradictory entries in a column. As for the APT, it will show you at provider level where that issue is being caused, so you can then go straight to that provider row and hopefully resolve it and get rid of the flag. So if there is a validation flag, please resolve before submitting. And again, as for the APT, on the validation sheet, if you hover your cursor over the top of the column headers or the validation description, it will pop up with a little comment just to say what that check is doing, and with some support onto how to resolve that validation flag being read. And then hopefully if you can then do that, carry out that action, it will then turn that flag green. Okay, and once you have a fully green validation sheet and the flag on the very front cover sheet is also green, then you will then be able to will happily accept that and then look at the volume of places that you're requesting. Okay, if it's red, please do look to resolve them before you submit. A quick reminder, as an addition to the place change process, there is also the opportunity for local authorities to make changes to funded high needs places for a school that is becoming an academy in year. Now, maintained mainstream and special and provision is out of scope of the main place change process, but we recognise that changes can happen in year, and that is it would be helpful and appropriate to reflect those changes when a school becomes an academy, so that everyone is clear about the number of places that have been funded and deducted from the DSG for the local authority, and it reflects the latest position at the point of conversion. So schools becoming academies from the 1st of January are out of scope, but you should complete the form available from the delivery officer at the DFE who is handling that conversion or move from a school to an academy, if a change is needed in the number of high needs places. It needs to be countersigned by your CFO, and it needs to be copied to the converting school when it is submitted back to the delivery officer. This is so that everyone's clear that the place funding for the academy and the subsequent deductions from the DSG, everybody's clear about the date on which that is going to be based. If you can submit the form before they convert, there is a much higher chance that that will be reflected in funding for the academy from the point of opening. Okay, we will update it in the dedicated schools grant at the next available opportunity after conversion. And if we do not receive a form, then the allocation will be based on the latest published place data, which is in the S251 returns that have recently been published for financial year 23-24. So that link will take you to the gov.uk statistics service website. That included on it is the place data for schools as entered in the S251, and that is what we will use. It doesn't split it out by pre and post 16. We will assume that all places are pre-16. Okay, so if there is information about the split, then please do complete the form via the delivery officer, who will be able to send it to you, and then we will take that and adjust funding appropriately. As I say, if there's no change or there's no form received, that data is what we will use, okay, because it's the latest that we have for non-academies, if you like, and it's come from yourselves, so therefore that is what we would use to deduct from your DSG for the recently converted academy. Very briefly on hospital education, there are no changes to the approach from previous years. And as I've mentioned, but I will repeat for emphasis, we do require an additional signatory on the cover tab for hospital education LAs who are operating that area of funding. Okay, so we do need that additional sign off. So if you fill that in and there isn't that additional signatory, we will send the form back and say, I'm sorry, we do need that signatory before we'll consider it. Okay, so please do make sure you've got that for both sections. For the, I think it's less than 10% of LAs who operate with a hospital education provision and have that funding in there. There are links to the arrangements and how to complete the high needs place change workbook. There is an email contact if you have further queries.